Hi there. Okay, so this is key area, I want to say 5, 6, 5 of multicellular organisms. And we're looking at transport systems in plants. Now, the reason why this is titled like this is we also look at transport systems in animals as the next key area. Okay, so there are 2 transport system key areas. This first one is about plants. There is only one video about it. We will try and make it as quick and painless as possible, but there will be a fair amount of content in there, so bear that in mind. So all the things that the SQA wants you to know about transport systems are listed there. I'm not going to go through it. You can pause it or come back to this if you want to.
Okay, so in this video we're going to be learning specifically about the structures in the plants that are responsible for transport of water and sugar. And by the end of this you should be able to name the various plant organs, which is really nice. You should be able to label the structures of a leaf, which is not as nice as naming the organs. You should be able to describe xylem and phloem tissue. You should be able to describe the process of transpiration as a whole, and you should be able to state different factors that would increase or decrease transpiration.
Okay, now the plant organs that you need to know, there are 3 of them: leaves, stem and root. I don't know how to make this more, they just are. These are the 3 plant organs. Remember, an organ is a bunch of tissues working together, and a tissue is a bunch of cells working together for the same function.
Okay, so in terms of the leaf structure, there are several different features you need to know. For the majority of them, the only way they will come up is here is a picture, here is part A, B, C, D, which one is this, or something like that. There's just 2 you need to know a tiny bit more about, which we'll touch on in the next slide. But for the majority of them, if you get a picture like this, you just need to be able to label it. So at the top, you've got the upper epidermis, then going down the way, the palisade mesophyll, which are the kind of more structured ones. You then got the spongy mesophyll, which are the kind of more circular ones, kind of blobbed about a bit. You then have the vein, which is made up of the xylem and phloem. We'll touch on what they are in a wee bit. You then have the lower epidermis at the bottom, but also within the lower, beside the lower epidermis, you also have things called guard cells and stomata, which we will kind of talk about the stomata a tiny bit as we go on. But generally, most of these you don't need to know much about other than to be able to label them on a diagram that looks a bit like this.
All right, now we mentioned about palisade and spongy mesophyll. You might get an exam question that asks you to compare their functions or compare how much photosynthesis they're doing. Palisade mesophyll are nearer the surface of the leaf than spongy mesophyll. Okay, now because of this, palisade mesophyll have got more chlorophyll because they get more light exposure where they are. More light exposure means they have more ability for photosynthesis, so it makes sense that these cells would produce more chloroplasts inside of themselves and have more chlorophyll so they can do more photosynthesis. Okay, the palisade mesophyll are also more closely bunched together. The idea is to catch as much light as possible. So they are the main site of photosynthesis within a leaf, is the palisade mesophyll. Spongy mesophyll can still do some photosynthesis, but not as much as palisade mesophyll. Spongy mesophyll are spread out, okay? They've got holes in them like a sponge, okay? And the idea is those holes are for gases and evaporated water. We'll touch on that in a bit as we go through this.
So in terms of the structures you kind of need to know a little bit more about. The 2 of them, there's the xylem and the phloem. So we'll touch on the xylem first of all. So it's a type of tissue, and you need to know kind of 2 or 3 main things about it. It's all the underlined words on this slide basically. So you need to know that xylem is a type of plant tissue, and it is responsible for transporting water and minerals up a plant. And you need to say up, it's not throughout, it is specifically going up, because as you should know, the water in a plant generally comes from the roots, and it goes from the roots and it goes up the xylem and then to wherever it needs to go in a plant. So the xylem is transporting water and minerals up a plant, and the xylem vessel, and this is a really bizarre one, it is not living, which yes, that means dead, but you need to say it is not living because that's what the SQE say. So the xylem vessel is not living and it is hollow. So
like a straw.
Yeah, it's basically a giant glorified straw. So in terms of the structure, the couple of things you need to know about it. You need to know that it contains this thing called lignin. So we would say that the walls of the xylem are lignified because it contains lignin. And this lignin is basically just there to strengthen the tissue, so as when it has got water coming up it, like it would in a straw, it basically doesn't collapse is the main thing. Is it's just strengthening the wall so as when water is coming up it can withstand the water pressure, so as it doesn't just fall flat on its face, because that wouldn't be good for a plant.
Or just burst open, and yeah, just that would not be good either. Now, transpiration is something new. So transpiration is the process of transporting water up a plant. So it is a process, it's not a thing. You cannot point and say, there's the transpiration, okay? It is a process of water being transported up a plant. Okay, now water has to be transported up a plant for two reasons. Number one, for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis happens in the leaves, okay, and it needs water as a raw material. You'll learn about that when we look at the Life on Earth unit, unit 3 later on, but water is one of the raw materials for photosynthesis. And for the second, to transport materials in the water. Water is not just water, it's also minerals and the odd vitamin and the odd bit of nitrate. And the idea is the plant needs these things, so it gets carried in the water up through the plant.
So in terms of the process of transpiration, now this is quite a common kind of 3-4 marker question where it is just explain the steps of what is happening here. It's quite a nice one if you get it. So the process starts in something called a root hair cell. It's the one you can see in the green box here. It's kind of almost like it's got a tail. And the idea is it's got this longer part to it, and that's just increasing the surface area so as it can reach further and it can absorb more water. But the idea is the process of transpiration begins when the root hair cell brings water into the plant through that process we all know and love called osmosis.
Okay, remember with osmosis, water is moving from the higher concentration, in this case in the soil, to the lower concentration in the root hair cell. Okay, so that's how it moves, and again, it does not require any energy to do this. Now, step 2, the water then continues to move along root hair cells, along through the basically root structure, again through osmosis. Basically, once the first cell has done osmosis, it now has a higher concentration of water inside of it, and the cell neighbour next door has a lower concentration. So water keeps moving from the higher concentration to the lower, to the higher, to the lower, to the higher, to the lower, until eventually it reaches the next step.
And then once it's made its way all along the root, that's when our xylem comes into play, and the water is just going to pass up the stem in the xylem. So basically the stem of the plant, you should know what that is, it's kind of the main body of it. The xylem is within that, and the water is going to pass up the xylem.
Okay, as it travels up the xylem, okay, eventually it's going to reach a leaf. Okay, at the leaf, the water will then leave the xylem and enter the spongy mesophyll. If we think back to the leaf diagram, the idea is you've got your leaf vein sitting right next to the spongy mesophyll. So the water will leak out, get into the spongy mesophyll, and it can be used for photosynthesis there. Okay, water can then also evaporate out of the spongy mesophyll and diffuse out of the stomata into the air. Now remember, the stomata are holes in the bottom surface of the leaf, okay? And that water can then just basically be pulled out of the stomata, and that essentially creates this suction-like straw effect of the whole of transpiration. We've got water coming out the top at the stomata and in at the bottom at the root hair cells, so that's creating a kind of suction pressure that's drawing water up into the leaf and then out through the air, and it's using some of that water as.
And this is just a very nice gift that just shows the water molecule movement. So it goes from water in the soil in through the root hair, in through the root, up the xylem, and then out through the stomata in the leaf.
Just a really nice one.
GIF.
Okay, now you need to know about factors that affect the rate of transpiration. So this transpiration, basically I was saying, is more water getting sucked up through the plant or is less water getting sucked up through the plant? Now there are 4 main factors that do this. Wind speed, so an increase in wind speed will affect transpiration. Humidity, temperature, and also surface area, basically, or number of stomata actually. More stomata will mean more transpiration. Okay, now you might get an exam question that looks like this. You need to have a vague understanding that this piece of kit here measures transpiration, okay? It lets you understand how fast transpiration is happening. The leafy twig is a plant that is going to do transpiration, and it is going to suck water up from the bottom of that stem up through and out of the leaves. If it's doing more transpiration, it will draw up more water. If it's doing less transpiration, it will draw up less water. Now, the thing to focus on is that air bubble that is marked on the diagram. If the plant is drawing up water and sucking water in, that air bubble is going to move essentially to the left. It's going to move towards the plant as basically the water that's next to the air bubble gets sucked inside of it. Okay? If it's doing less transpiration, that air bubble will move really slowly. If it's doing more transpiration, that bubble will move really quickly. Okay? You might be expected to understand what these results mean. So you need to understand this idea that the oxygen bubble movement or the air bubble movement means transpiration. Okay? So the faster it moves, the more transpiration happening because more water is getting sucked up into that plant that's at the top of this apparatus.
So the main thing that actually really comes up with this is actually how you would adapt an investigation to transpiration. So you might get given an investigation transpiration, it might explain a bit about what's happening, but the thing they really want you to say is actually how can you control or how can you adapt this investigation to really see what's happening in terms of transpiration. The key things to go for in this is thinking about the factors that affect transpiration. So thinking about things like humidity. How do you control humidity? You can place a clear bag over the plant, just like is seen in this diagram here. If you want to control temperature, you could put the plant in a water bath at a specific temperature. You could put it in a greenhouse at a specific temperature. So just something that controls a temperature. Or similarly, wind speed, you could place it beside a fan and then set the fan to a set wind speed, and that means you know the wind speed. So just thinking about the things, thinking about the factors that affect the rate of transpiration and thinking, well, how can I control these things? As long as it vaguely makes sense and it is a realistic thing, you will be fine with it.
It's a common enough exam question that comes up just saying, suggest a way to change the humidity. So put a plastic bag over it. Suggest a way to change the wind speed. Use a fan. Do not suggest a hairdryer, because some of you should think about why a hairdryer controls two or changes two variables rather than one, unless you put it on the cold setting. Okay, phloem is the second type of transport vessel that is inside plants, and it's the last thing that we cover as part of this key area, and it transports sugar. Now, it transports sugar up and down and left and right all over the plant, okay? So while xylem only goes up, phloem can go anywhere. And phloem is also different to xylem in that it is a living tissue, whereas xylem is dead.
Sorry. So in terms of the phloem structure, the things that you need to know is these two things. You need to know these things called sieve plates, which basically they are a bit like a sieve. They are a plate that has small holes in it that allows certain things through and certain things not through, and they are kind of religiously structured throughout the phloem. They also have things called companion cells that are, as you can see in this case, you can see the little black nucleus on them. They're just at the side, kind of the main structure of it. You don't really need to know much about what these are, what they do. You just need to be able to know if there's a picture and it says this is structure X. You need to either be able to say, well, that's a sieve plate or that's a companion cell.
Or that's phloem because I can recognize that it's got companion cells. Okay, so to compare them and the two things that they do, the xylem vessel only allows movement of water and minerals up the vessel. Water is transported and minerals, no plates between the cells. The walls are strengthened with lignin.
Whereas in phloem, the molecules can be transported up and down. It's generally sugar molecules that are transported. There are sieve plates between the cells, and there are also companion cells at the side.
Okay, so we're just going to summarize everything that we've covered so far, because that is the whole key area done there. Okay, so your plant organs that you need to know are your root, leaves, and stem.
The palisade mesophyll, so that is the cells under the upper surface of the leaf, so the kind of ones near the top of the leaf, and they contain lots of chlorophyll and absorb a lot of light.
The spongy mesophyll are the cells in a leaf that contain chlorophyll and have air spaces in between to give that spongy effect.
The stomata are holes in the bottom surface that allow gas exchange and allows the water evaporation from the leaf.
Xylem are dead tubes lined with lignin that carry water and minerals up a leaf.
And the phloem are tubes with living companion cells and sieve plates that will carry sugar throughout the plant.
Right, we're also going to summarize transpiration for you as well. Okay, so in transpiration here, the important structures and what they do. The root hair cells are large surface area cells because they've got the big surface area that absorb water and minerals via osmosis from the soil.
The root hair cells, the root cells pass water through to the xylem again via osmosis.
The xylem is going to carry water minerals up the plant to the leaf.
The leaf vein is what delivers water to the spongy mesophyll.
The spongy mesophyll moves the water where the water moves into the air spaces between the spongy mesophyll.
And the stomata, again, that little gap, and that's just where the water evaporates out of the stomata.
Now, if you had like a 5-mark question on transpiration and you wrote this here, you'd probably be fine because it's in the right order and it's just saying the basic roles of all the things. So things that you should be able to do is name your 3 plant organs. Have a think about it yourself. We're not going to run through them. Answer to yourself. You should be able to label the structure of a leaf. Okay, so the main structures including palisade mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, and your stomata, but also your upper and lower epidermis. You should be able to describe xylem and phloem tissues in terms of what they carry and also their structural features. Okay. Describe the process of transpiration. There's your kind of 4 or 5 mark type question. That's quite a long one there. And then state factors that may increase or decrease transpiration, and maybe even also give suggestions as to how you could increase or decrease that particular factor. vector. Okay, so that's the whole of this key area done. A lot of information in there. It does come up quite a lot in past paper questions, so again, we would rarely recommend that you are seeking out past paper questions on this topic and practicing them now and later and all the time, because they are the best possible practice for your exams and for your tests and your prelims. Okay, next key area is animal transport, and it's going to be divided into 3 chunks because it's a lot bigger. Okay, we'll see you then.